Well, good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, and good morning to some of you who are on the West Coast or further afield than Canada. I want to welcome all of you to our webinar today, hosted by the Chartered Institute of Logistics and Transport in North America. And I want to thank you for joining us to hear about COVID, the new different. I'm Bob Armstrong. I'm the president of the Chartered Institute of Logistics and Transport here in North America, and I'll act as moderator today. For those of you who are not aware of CILT, we're a professional body in the supply chain, logistics, and transport industry. We have over 34,000 members in over 30 countries. CILT's mission is to develop the art and science of logistics and transport through research, education, network, and the sharing of ideas. First, I would like to share with you a few housekeeping items. One, everyone is muted with your video off. Please do not unmute or turn on your video. We encourage any questions you would like to put to the speakers and have planned time at the end of the webinar for our Q&A panel. If you have a question, please use the Zoom chat feature and they will be collated during the webinar. 3, this event is being recorded and will be available for viewing on CILTNA's YouTube channel. We will email everyone attending links to access the recording after the event. Before I introduce our speaker, I would like to take a moment to thank the Hamilton-Oshawa Port Authority for sponsoring today's webinar. Now for the exciting part, I would like to introduce our speaker, who has an incredible background, Anne Waldes. Anne has more than 35 years of progressive management experience in international logistics and global freight transportation, and is at the forefront of developing innovative supply chain solutions for clients with the most complex logistics challenges. In her current role as president and CEO of TradeLink International Limited, which she founded in 1993, and creates bottom line impact for global clients in diverse sectors by optimizing entire supply chains, including elements of logistics management, inventory control, product sequencing, overseas site selection, multimodal transportation, and international trade-related procedures. Prior to founding TradeLink, Anne held senior leadership roles with international transportation and steamship lines. Anne is currently the board chair of the Hamilton-Oshawa Port Authority. She's a director and past president of the Hong Kong Canada Business Association. She's a valued member of the Chartered Institute of Logistics and Transportation and has served on our Greater Toronto Hamilton regional chapter. Anne is regularly invited to be a guest speaker on logistics and supply chain themes at transportation conferences and events. I know Anne very well. She's a proven dynamic leader with natural strategic instincts. Anne is very passionate about logistics transformation approaches that achieve both short-term impact and long-term sustainability. Ladies and gentlemen, Anne Waldes.
Thanks very much, Bob, for that kind introduction. And welcome everybody to today's webinar, The New Different, and subtitled, Get Your Ship Together. I'd like to talk a little bit about supply chain. As we all know that behind every successful company is a strong supply chain, and maybe some of you weren't aware that the supply chain spend is usually second or third on any company's P&L. So briefly, what is a supply chain? It's a very complex network, and simply put, it's a system of organizations, people, activity, information, and resources that are involved in supplying a product or service to a consumer. The importance of clearly laying out the supply chain is that it will help any company define its own market and decide where it wants to be in the future. In developing corporate level strategies, a company often needs to make these decisions as to whether to operate as a single business or to enter into related or unrelated industries, which will develop some vertical integration. An analyst firm called Gartner typically yearly comes out with the top 25 supply chains in the world. And I've just taken some snippets from this year, 2020's top 10, number one being Cisco Systems. And I think this is how you would define a world-class supply chain, and these separate the good from the great. Things that these supply chain leaders are doing are enterprise-wide circular economies. They're introducing, Colgate-Palmolive, for example, has introduced true zero waste certification, possible with recyclable toothpaste tubes. Johnson & Johnson are heavily involved in collaborative robots, 3D printing, and AI. Nestle, heavily involved in supply chain technologies such as demand sensing. Pepsi, sustainability source products, and they expect to have 100% renewable electricity in all of their US ops by 2030, done so through electric vehicles, forklifts, etc. Alibaba, which is a huge supply chain and almost in a league of their own, they're pushing forward in the grocery sector to have order and fulfillment done within 30 minutes. How they'll do that, I'm not sure, but that's what their aim is. So that's a little bit on supply chain. Let's talk about COVID now. Is COVID actually a disruptor, or is COVID the bump in the road? That's yet to be determined. But we do know that COVID has transformed and is disrupting every business. It changes how we work, how we trade, how we travel, how we shop, what we watch, what we share. And it seems no matter how much technology we have, we've discovered that there's no escaping Mother Nature. She seems to have this great way of making us speed up and adhere to things that maybe are futuristic. And I think COVID in this respect didn't crush the future, but rather has only sped it up, and especially technologically. I think we're seeing maybe the next 5 years worth of technology may have to be rolled into the next 18 months for some factories and some manufacturers to realize survival. We have less offices. We have nearly 5 million Canadians right now are working from home. So there's a transition from the typical office into the home office. For a lot of people that works, for some it doesn't. Nearly 3 in 10 Canadians are shopping online for things that they would normally buy in a store. So that obviously is heavily impacting the bricks and mortar. Buy local has become a call to action. I know in our vicinity where there's a lot of fruits and vegetables, it's very good to go out and be local. 78% of Canadians are more likely to choose Canadian brand products as a result of the pandemic. So the bricks and mortar will hurt. The digitally enabled retailers will capture more business. And if you're able to pivot online, you'll capture more business still. What we watch, there's a collapse to live events rather. There's a surge in virtual competitions. Esports audience is estimated to be at 5 million people in 2020. How we trade, there's more protectionism, higher prices. Provinces are launching market campaigns to promote local businesses and products, and countries are reevaluating their economic security and restructuring supply chains. I thought it would be a nice add-on to reach out and talk to some of my industry colleagues just for their take on how COVID has disrupted the supply chain. Our first one that we're seeing is from Bruce Rogers, the Executive Director of CIFA, and just some highlights. He says COVID-19 has caused supply chain disruption at historic levels, but there's also been shifting trade patterns as manufacturing and distribution centers are being shut down with minimal to no notice. But on the positive side, COVID-19 could become a key trigger for digital and technological transformation within the freight forwarding industry. ZIM, the next contributor is ZIM Integrated Shipping Lines, a large worldwide steamship line. Dwayne Spence, their business development manager, says that the COVID pandemic has been very challenging for the shipping industry. Asia and Europe import and export volume has seen significant reductions, except for, of course, food products and PPE. Demand has risen sharply over the second half, and exports are now starting to stabilize. Our last one, a colleague of mine who I've known for years, a competitor in the industry, Mr. Jeff Cullen, CEO of Road Air International Holdings. And Jeff coins it quite nicely, where he says the impact of COVID on global supply chain is truly a black swan event. like no other we've seen in our lifetime. The impact will be far-reaching into the future, yet there are some unseen benefits as we collaborate and redesign global supply chains. So I guess the message there is there's a silver lining in every cloud. Just want to talk to you a little bit about economy. We're nearly 6 months now into this great lockdown with no clear end in sight. And I apologize, but my crystal ball overloaded and basically blew up just before this webinar. So I have to really rely on some professionals for some economic input. First of which is from the Conference Board of Canada. Since the mandated business closures and lack of consumer confidence, they feel that this may result in an 8.2% contraction for the Canadian economy this year, and that's the worst contraction on record. At its peak, there were 3 million Canadians that had lost their jobs due to the pandemic, but that employment rose a little bit in August, recovering around 250,000. And totally, Canada has recovered 1.9 million of those 3 million lost, and the remaining 1 million, they're yet to be recovered, and I think they're facing some structural problems. Many of these jobs may never come back because of the transitioning, and I think for recovery, they should be looking at creating jobs in other segments of the economy that have a brighter future. By province, Ontario saw the largest increase in jobs this month with 150,000, followed by Quebec and BC. And that was in the service producing industries, while employment in goods producing industries rose by only 27,000. By industry, employment was the strongest this month as schools across the country reopen. Accommodation and food services also rose slightly as the confidence in going to restaurants has risen, and manufacturing was the lowest on this list, unfortunately, but there is a small continued steady rise there. And no industry is yet to recover to the full February levels, that's for sure. And an economist that I do follow, Mr. Peter Hall, he's one of the chief economists at the EDC, he says that our outlook looks manageable and that Canadian sectors like retail and international trade are what he would coin V-shaped, and that presents some hope that other economies may follow. And he sees two economies currently, one's red hot, one's ice cold, and then there's a third emerging in the middle that may indicate a need for some creativity and some non-conventional strategic responses. But at the end of the day, both sources concur that we need to be strategic and we need to be unconventional, and that a product shift is definitely likely. A quick update on the BRIC countries. China is almost back to full productivity. They are facing some large volume stock because of the global slowdowns, but those are clearing out. And that's coupled with their consumer consumption as well. That has been down. China, it looks like, will be the lone major economy to grow this year, while developed economies will commence a slow recovery for 21. There's an uneven economy recovery in China at this point too. It seems that demand for luxury brands and cars was up 60%, and it doesn't seem like there's any sign of that slowing down, while the lower end of the income scale will fall deeper into poverty. India was in bad shape before they were really even hit by the pandemic that came to them in April-June quarter. And they were in the midst of a worse dip since their 2011-2012 recession. Under complete lockdown, India has less than a quarter of its $2.8 trillion economic movement functional. Up to 53% of businesses in the country were projected to be significantly affected. And India's GDP is set to contract somewhere between 5 and 10%. Brazil is trying to make a comeback as a green recovery. They want to implement long-term solutions across multiple sectors that will reduce carbon emissions, and in particular, the Amazon deforestation. And they're trying to shift to a low carbon economy, and they feel that could boost their economy by 33%. Russia, I think Russia is anybody's guess. Of course, it's hard to get information on Russia, but I think the oil consumption is tied closely to China for their economy, and they were hit hard when manufacturing in China all but stopped, and then hit again when COVID cases started to climb in Russia and businesses locked down. But in April, industrial production in Russia dropped by 13.3%, and they expect a drop of 8% in their GDP. And the recovery period in Russia, I think, largely depends on the development of the oil prices and the length and the severity of the pandemic. Europe kind of turned in on itself almost as soon as the coronavirus arrived. Countries began putting their own citizens' needs first and ignoring pleas for help from their neighbors. European Union member states closed their borders, and that was for the first time in decades, and literally competed against each other for vital medical supplies and ventilators. And the biggest rift now, of course, is their economic rescue package that was introduced. The German Chancellor, Angela Merkel, has called this the biggest test the EU has ever faced. So let's see if they can get by that. The bottom line here is 2020 will definitely be a year for the history books. I'm not a fan of slides in presentations, but I thought it was important to share this next slide with you. The outbreak that could cost the global economy up to $2 trillion this year. So I thought it was good to show you where we were in 2008, 2009, when we had the last global financial crisis, and where we're headed now with the COVID-19 shock. We're not there yet, and hopefully we don't get there. So just a little bit of an update on the transportation side of things. When COVID first hit, I liken it to dropping a jigsaw puzzle, and the pieces kind of flew everywhere. It was a daily, weekly, monthly adjustment. We were always having to change how we did things, where we looked to find suppliers and resources, etc. And prime example of my first line here, Asia to North America air rates continue to decline. That was the way it was in making this presentation, and now today I can tell you in the last 2 or 3 days those air rates are back on the rise. And some strange things have happened too, like the China rail surge. It went up like 87%. So railing from China to Europe, that was a big alternative for customers that didn't want to pay the surging air freight rates and couldn't get on board a ship. Our rail rates also in Canada rose by 4% in May, June. So that's an indication that the manufacturing and construction sectors are reopening. And also a demand for Asia-Europe road freight picked up, which is something that we haven't seen before. Transit time between China and Western Europe average about 16 days compared to the current air transit time, which is about 8 days. So it was a good alternative to something that might otherwise be very expensive. So let's touch a bit on cargo in the air. I'll come back to the $3 and the $18.50 in a minute. But what impacts has this had on commercial air? What are current industry trends? And what does the air cargo industry look like moving forward? International market accounts for about 87% of air cargo. The global commercial airline industry reports a 90% decrease in revenue and bookings, and by the end of 2020, IATA predict $250 billion in losses. One example, and they're not alone, Cathay Pacific are parking 40% of their fleet. They're undergoing a major restructure, and they need to determine what size and shape will allow them to thrive in this new environment. And why is this important in particular is because 45 to 50% of all air cargo rides in the belly hold of passenger aircraft. So as the passenger flights were canceled and reduced a ton of capacity, air freight rates obviously went through the roof. So cost to send air freight across the Pacific more than tripled. And I'll refer back to the first slide. We started out in March, a cost to send air freight from China to Toronto was around $3 US a kilo. And then between March and April, it became $18.50 a kilo. So if you look at a 2,000 kilo air shipment in March would have cost you 6,000 US to move. If you looked at it in April, that same shipment would have cost you 37,000 US dollars. So commercial airlines have had to find a way to attract revenue to make up for the huge losses on the passenger and to bridge that gap. So airlines have turned to flying passenger planes with just cargo. cargo in the seats, cargo in the overheads, cargo in the belly. And that's even accelerated to removing seats from entire aircraft and repurposing the passenger aircraft for cargo only. On behalf of some of our clients, TradeLink, over the last few months, we've sourced several air freight charters moving tons of PPE equipment. And this really became the only way to control your spend, to secure space and to ensure a timely delivery. Just to give you an idea, the regular pre-COVID cost to charter a 747 was between $500,000 and $700,000 versus what it is today of between $1 and $1.3 million. And to add salt to that wound, the commercial airlines in China began asking for payment up front. So if you were booking 50,000 kilos at $18.50 a kilo, you needed to pay that up front. And if for any reason your manufacturer in China, whatever reason, you did not hit cutoff for that plane, that was it. You were out. Your money was gone. They loaded someone else's cargo on that plane and done. It was a loss. So the airline industry continues to reduce their passenger operation and add freighters. The rates since April settled somewhat because the demand tailed off. But we didn't expect that to last for long. We had situations like Apple delayed their launch of the iPhone 12. And ocean capacity right now is extremely tight and rates are at record highs. And Chinese factories are about to shut down for the Golden Week holiday. So we expect that the rates into North America will spike again. Rates in other key markets such as Taipei, Singapore, Vietnam, Manila, and Southeast Asia, they remain strong because there's still limited capacity there and increased demand as shippers reposition their manufacturing at the height of the US-China trade wars. Most recent update on air freight, just from yesterday, all cargo operators, including passenger airline operating cargo only, are experiencing record load factors and are expected to be booked solid for the remainder of the year on major trade lanes. And passenger traffic is not expected to resume in any great shape into the middle of 2021 or beginning of 2021. How tight's the market? Consider the freighter capacity now accounts for 66% of total air capacity on the transatlantic lane, 83% on Trans-Pacific, and 80% on the Europe to Asia, as opposed to freighter capacity a year ago was 33% transatlantic, 59% Trans-Pacific, and 50% Europe to Asia. Air cargo operators and logistics companies were responding to short supply with some new offerings for shippers, but it's only making a small dent in the transport shortage, and a large portion of the new equipment is devoted to the Asia market, where, as I say, the rates are rising again amid the competition and limited space. The next big push everybody is gearing up for is the distribution of a COVID vaccine, and of course no one knows when that's coming. But a little tidbit of information I came across in my research, according to IATA, providing just one dose to 7.8 billion people would fill 8,000 Boeing 747 planes. So that's pretty scary considering there's not that many planes on the planet. So let's continue on to ocean. I'll give you a little bit of update on ocean. I think COVID was unexpected and it's wreaked havoc globally with the carriers. The initial concerns surrounded manufacturing capacity in Asia and its impact on port and vessel operations. But what wasn't anticipated at the time was the health and economic impact that COVID would have as it spread to Europe and North America. The net impact was a rapid decline in volumes for the steamship lines, and in an industry with high fixed costs like ocean shipping, there's significant pressure to fill the ships and ultimately chase market share. In response to COVID, however, carriers collectively adopted a new strategy called blank sailings, and blank sailings are complete cancellations of entire voyages. This reflects a change in their strategy from the typical market share race to one of margin maximization. And for this to work, all carriers needed to be on board, and so far they have been. At one point, the weekly blank sailings worldwide reached over 200. And Alphatainer, which is a proprietary database for the liner industries, at the end of May reported that 551 vessels representing 12% of the capacity in the industry were laid up in ports in support of this strategy. So Their strategy, of course, by limiting capacity, the market can support higher rates, and that's exactly what's happening now. So peak season in a pandemic, what happens to ocean freight rates and capacity? Ocean freight budgets for shipments from Asia to US and Canada and Europe are going through the roof as carriers prepare for yet another round of what we call GRI, or general rate increases. That started in September 15th, there was another one. The Shanghai Containerized Freight Index, which tracks this, says that we're 54% higher than a year ago. And container spot rates from Asia to the US East Coast will jump for a 40-footer to around $5,000, and they're close to that now, which is well beyond the 2018 trade war high of $4,000. Rates to the West Coast, as of last week, jumped to $4,000 per 40, another record for that trade lane, and that is 189% recorded for the same week of last year. Just to give you an idea of what it would cost Asia-based ports to Toronto via the West Coast, we're looking at $5,000 per 40-foot container as we speak. Just to give you an example, we quoted a client in middle of August. He shipped by the first week of September, and we had to go back to him and revise his rate and tell him that his rate had increased $1,000 in 3 weeks. So as we sit right now, the space is pretty much sold out from the Asian ports to the US and Canada until at least the end of the month. And availability of empty equipment at depots across Asian ports is still very tight. As you can imagine, with all the blank sailings, the empties ended up strewn everywhere. So it's a real scramble to get them back where they're needed and still keep to a cost minimum. There's also something happening because of the very tight space. Carriers are charging premium fees now for equipment in space priority, similar to what the airlines do. And those fees can range anywhere from $500 to $2,000 a box. Elsewhere, the Asia to Europe trade lane, shippers are also up against it with the spot rates jumping, and there's even containers being rolled. Premium rates are happening there, and equipment shortage is reported at depots. The most recent thing that happened, though, on Friday is the Chinese government stepped in and they tried to take control and say, okay, shipping guys, enough of this. They were trying to encourage the major container lines to add capacity and to be less aggressive in raising their rates. The FMC has also warned that it's monitoring the number of blank sailings and the capacity as they introduce some more ships back into the system, but it's bits and pieces. So they're really trying to control it. And we will see shortly what happens with the Chinese government and their requests. I know that some of the lines have rolled back their September 15th GRIs, but some of them are sticking to it as well. I wanted to just stick a little reminder in here today about what you see isn't always what you get. And when you're picking your service provider, please make sure that you vet them. And cheapest is not always the best. I'd also like to give you a local update, something that's near and dear to my heart, and that's HAPA Ports. That's the Hamilton-Oshawa Port Authority. In June of 2019, the Hamilton Port Authority merged with the Oshawa Port Authority, creating the brand for an integrated port network known as HAPA Ports, making us the largest port in Ontario. By investing in sustainable infrastructure, we're building prosperous waterfronts. Our regional impact, the cargo that comes through our ports is valued at more than $3 billion and represents 40,000 Ontario jobs. So that's pretty substantial. HAPA was very proactive and responded quickly to the COVID crisis to continue operations of the ports as a vital supply chain link, as well as working to keep our port staff, users, and the community safe. We did have a decline, and we are experiencing a rebound. In April, we saw steelmaking commodities, coal, iron ore reduced as ArcelorMittal's blast furnace idled. May, almost all the commodities were down by about 35% off from 2019 levels. Steelmaking commodities, gasoline and corn were hit the hardest. Fertilizer, salt, finished steel maintained decent levels, and by late summer, we started to see a rebound, particularly with Ontario grown grain exports getting stronger, and we expect to see, at the end of the day, 2018 levels by season's end. Not as good as 19, but clearly in recovery mode. So we're hoping that people will make some smart transportation choices, and those will ripple through several industries, and we can aid Canadian manufacturers with more efficient supply chains. HAPA's navigated well through the crisis, and now we're focused on how to contribute to constructive restart of Canada's economy. I wanted to share with you some emerging trends from the crisis. Global versus regional reshoring, diversifying away from China or expanding manufacturing operations in at least one other location is a likely strategy for our multinational clients. End-to-end supply chain control, not as easy as it sounds. I know that you like to have control of as much as you can, but unless you're in an industry where you can diversify or merge, it's sometimes difficult. Digitalization and information management, to cater to the disparate communication systems and levels of technology advancement in supply chain networks. It's very fragmented, and definitely it needs some work. Transport industry consolidation, it's an inevitable consequence of past economic downturns, and I think it's inevitable with this one as well. And warehouses are emerging in Toronto as a hot property as shopping habits continue to shift. And that sparks demand for warehouse and distribution facilities close to population centers. Resiliency is another one. Have you made your supply chain resilient? I think shippers are looking at resiliency a little differently nowadays. Inventory management, for example, is not at a digital level and is going through some transformation, and that's a good thing. Sustainability, cost and sustainability practices often go hand in hand, and forward-thinking shippers are exploring and collaborating on other solutions, such as a short sea shipping service for US, Mexico, and Canada. There's a strategic value of moving volume off the road for sustainability and off the rail for pricing leverage. And I think to effectively compete, supply chains need to be flexible and agile, as well as able to respond to changes on short notice. And this is different from the traditional supply chain thinking that focuses on reliability and consistency and low cost. Okay, so what are some of the challenges that are facing Canadian businesses? We're looking at fragmented supply chains. We're looking at sustaining operations, trying to balance supply and demand. We see, for example, that while China suppliers are coming back on stream, many customers are running at lower capacity and reporting that demand of their products is below normal. How to assess and retain and deploy the workforce during the slowdown while ensuring employees are safe and following local government guidelines. Cash flow management is a huge one, protecting the solvency of your business and the workforce, as well as keeping abreast of the solvency of your clients' financial health. Reviewing sourcing supply chain strategies, preparing for supply chain pivots, identifying alternative suppliers and markets as backup or secondary sources, how to interact with customers in this current new different. Unstable and rising supply chain costs, as we just talked about, with the ocean and the air freight. And it seems there's a new one, and that is more complexity in the supply chain. 91% of supply chain professionals polled say that they can't stay ahead of the challenges of the new complexity in both manufacturing and fulfillment. We're looking at more products, more distribution channels, and basically more customer demands. Trade war effects, narrow profit margins, and also the need for supply chain visibility. Manufacturers are going to meet soaring customer demands for more transparency throughout the product lifespan. And the customer experience must be more real-time and granular in visibility. And of course, the age-old uncovering and addressing all the hidden risks in your supply chain. Those are a few of them. So how do we survive the new different? Some ideas to help navigate the uncertain times. Necessity is truly the mother of invention. Those that move to mitigate risk in their operation and supply chain are posed to better withstand the economic shock and will emerge stronger in the restarted economy. Companies need to consider what action must be taken now to mitigate supply chain impacts and how to build resilience against future disruptive shocks. Procurement, control tower in place, active management of open POs and delivery schedules, recognition of distressed suppliers and identification and renegotiation of cost potentials through reduced cost structures, liquidity again, ensure rigorous cash management and reduce non-critical use of cash, adjust working capital, redefine budgets and saving targets by category and geography. Supply chain stability, mobilize a central war room, if you will, to evaluate and address supply vulnerabilities and to monitor your risks daily. A COVID-19 supplier audit, assess critical vendors, provide action-oriented feedback, identify and eliminate or implement alternative supply scenarios and risk mitigation strategies. Example, local sourcing. Implement opportunities to partner with other companies or to optimize resources and provide financial and non-financial support to value chain partners. Moving away from just-in-time fulfillment. Examine your supply chain lines and work with your suppliers to adjust better downstream planning. Local sourcing, again, additional warehousing or at least a safety stock. Build in buffers and alternatives and always have that plan B. Technology. I can't stress this enough. If you haven't already invested heavily to improve your systems, your processes, your digitalization and automation initiatives, please do that. Automation is widely regarded as one of the simplest ways to, or the best ways to simplify your operation rather, and a lot of manufacturers are still relying heavily on manual workflows in key areas. Okay, last but not least, I think I'd be remiss if I didn't give a shout out to all the ladies that are listening today and all the ladies in the supply chain and in logistics in general. There's a lot of action groups out there now. There's one called Awesome. There's one called Women in Logistics. There's a lot of avenues that are open now for participation. And back in the late 70s when I first started, a little story, I was a week into my job. My boss said to me, come on, I'm going to take you to an industry function. I want to introduce you to a few people. It was about 650 people, and other than the servers, I was the only lady at that function. So that has changed somewhat. We've got 35% of the supply chain workforce now is women, but the glass ceiling still needs a little bit of breaking. And if I'm nothing else, I think I am a testament to tenacity and hard work and perseverance pays off. So please keep that in mind, ladies. I'd like to leave all of you with 5 words today: sustainability, resilience, agility, technology, and liquidity. If you take nothing else away today from what I said, please take those. And thanks so much for your time.
Well, thank you, Anne. That was very, very informative. Just some tremendous information. And I know how hard you worked on this, and certainly your research really shows in your presentation. So thank you. What I'd like to do now is a little Q&A, Anne. So I want to start out with something that's dear to my heart, which is called nearshoring. What kind of products do you see possibly coming back to local sourcing and production here in Canada?
One of the first ones, obviously, is PPE equipment. Any kind of ventilators, any kind of hospital equipment at all. Drugs is another one. I think we got a little bit caught off guard because a lot of our drugs are manufactured in India. But I think there's a lot of work to be done in building the skills gap, dealing with some regulations and some incentives that offshoring it's made offshoring attractive. So I think we have to address the housekeeping issues first before we can pull a lot of the solid manufacturing back on ground. There are some things, and I think we've left ourselves in that position over the course of the last couple decades. There are some things that just aren't manufactured here, that we don't have the technology or the wherewithal to manufacture. So it's all those kind of things that have to be done first in order to attract all of that manufacturing or some of that manufacturing back here. But the first things will be obviously the PPE equipment.
Thank you, Anne. That was a very good answer. How do you decide if vertical integration in your supply chain is right for your own company?
Good question, Bob. It's a complicated answer. You have to look at your supply chain from end to end. I think a prime example of good vertical integration is Starbucks. They own from bean to cup, basically. So that's an over-exaggeration of vertical integration, but you have to look at it. You have to look at what makes financial sense for your company, where your expertise is. Is it better that you stay as a specialist and try to source locally as a backup if you have to source overseas? Another example of that would be Bridgestone. They decided to backward integrate and diversify into rubber production because they foresaw a shortage of rubber and a great demand for rubber and materials for tire manufacturing in the future. So you really have to sit down and just assess it block by block by block.
Thank you. In your own business, and have you seen a significant shift from trans-Pacific flows to the Suez transatlantic? And if so, is this from Southeast Asia only, or would it include China-sourced supply chains?
As a business, no, we haven't seen that. Not in our business anyway. We have seen the greater flow comes through still Vancouver and the West Coast. And what we have seen is a lot of shuck and jive between air freight and ocean freight. And whatever other mode of transport, such as I mentioned, either rail or truck between Asia and China. But no, we haven't seen a lot of diversification. To be perfectly honest, our clients like to come to the West Coast versus the East Coast because of the transit time difference, and it is a little bit more expensive to come over the East Coast, unless of course you're residing on the East Coast. So to answer your question, no.
Yeah, and I agree with you there, Anne. I know in my time on the board of directors of the St. Lawrence Seaway Management, we marketed hard in Europe and Asia, trying to convince people to use the Suez transatlantic. And while there's some there, it hasn't been significant, especially given that Canada and the EU have a free trade agreement. We thought we'd see more, but I guess maybe we have to. Maybe when the pandemic's over, that'll increase for us. Here's another audience question. Hi, Anne. Thank you for the great market insight. I have a question. Using a passenger flight to carry cargo is not cost effective or efficient. Are the airlines considering ordering more combo aircraft that accommodates both low passenger but high cargo dimensions?
Good question. Not that I'm aware of. Again, I'm not privy to all the orders that are in the works for planes. From my understanding is a lot of the passenger airplanes are going to be parked, and a lot of them will be scrapped. There was a lot on the ledge to be scrapped anyway prior to COVID. I think there's a lot more being invested in removing seats from the current aircraft and making them more cost efficient. That's my understanding.
Good, thank you. I'm just trying to, okay. I just got one more here, another one here. I'm just trying to dig it out here, Anne.
Okay.
You recommend to move away from just-in-time models. What are you seeing in terms of warehousing rates and any tension between those warehouse rates and delivering goods on time and cost effectively during the pandemic?
Well, there's definitely a warehouse shortage, which will obviously put up the rates. I haven't seen any trouble between delivering from warehouses to customers, but what I have seen is clients scrambling to find warehouse space, and clients going out as far as Cambridge, Kitchener, the outlying areas to get warehouse space, because typically I don't know what the ratio is, but I don't think it's very low in Toronto. There isn't a lot of warehouse space, and every warehouse that I'm aware of is just chock-a-block full and busy and not taking on new clients. So that will definitely be a problem in the future if COVID is long lasting.
Very interesting. Thank you. Another comment, great presentation, and also appreciated the shout out for women. Could you expand on your comments about air capacity for distribution of coronavirus vaccine?
Okay. So if we were to give everyone in the world one dose, that would take up 8,000 747 freighters. So the panic now is in the logistics world and with the airlines trying to prepare themselves to effectively do this distribution. And they're just in the initial throes, and that goes side and side or hand in hand with taking seats out of passenger aircraft. All of those things will need to be done in order to distribute the vaccine in any kind of a quick or efficient manner. So they're getting a bit of a jump on that. It's just a matter of whether or not there's enough capacity around the world will determine how quickly it gets delivered.
Here's another good one. Reversing decades of accepted wisdom around the likes of just-in-time supply chains, globalization has few risks. Single supplier country is not a risk. Transport is low, cost buyers market, et cetera, et cetera. So the question is, are companies skilled enough today to make these changes? Is there a skills gap? And if so, how is it being addressed?
Definitely there's a skills gap, and I think it's too fresh to be addressed. I think the pendulum of everything being sourced offshore versus the pendulum of everything being sourced locally has to land somewhere in the middle, whether it's semi-manufacturing, maybe not full manufacturing, maybe it's sourcing pieces locally that you used to source in China, some of it, a plan B. I think that's what we have to look at going forward. And I think there's a lot of retraining that has to be done, but we're in the throes of it right now. So it's anybody's guess how that will pan out, but it is something that manufacturers definitely should be looking at today. Hiring skilled suppliers locally, partnering with those suppliers, partnering with universities and colleges such as Mohawk that are pumping out these kids that are wanting to get into a business and wanting to show their skills. I think that all will help in the future.
Thank you, Anne. I'm just checking to see if there's any other questions here. I don't see any. I wanted to end by just, and I think you've sort of already answered it during your presentation, but how has COVID impacted shipping on the St. Lawrence Seaway Great Lakes Marine Highway?
Another good question, Bob. Cargo-wise, the Great Lakes system, we've started to see the impact by midsummer. Steel producers obviously hit the brakes and they started scaling back on movements of raw material. And so did the goods destined for construction sites across Ontario, as did gasoline and fuels. In June, I think our volume was down maybe 30 to 35% lower than what you would expect at that point in the season. But Canadian ports, I think they've quickly moved to establish rapid communication channels with Transport Canada. And this was a clear priority on ensuring, the protection of their workers, et cetera. But I think as restrictions have eased a little, we've really begun to see a healthy rebound, and the comeback is led by grain, pretty much.
Thank you, Anne. I wanted to say in closing, Ann, first off, if we were in a meeting room today and I was thanking you live and in a meeting, you would be getting a standing ovation. This has just been tremendous. Let me read a couple of comments that are on our chat page. Very important insights, resilience, agility, technology resonate with the core competencies of the company I work for and has helped to keep the business moving with strength in this new era. Thank you, Ann.
Awesome.
And there are many more of these, Ann, which makes me very proud as president of CILTNA to have someone with your knowledge and expertise provide such a terrific presentation. So thank you very, very much.
It was my pleasure, Bob.
Well, I'm sure we'll be talking again. And I also want to also tell you that people have been saying thank you for your answers. Good call out for educational partners, highly informed and interesting presentation. Thank you very much. So this is great, Ann. Thank you so much. And I also want to take the opportunity to thank the Hamilton Oshawa Port Authority for their sponsorship. We always appreciate that because there are costs to doing webinars. So I did want to talk a bit about, as we close, our next webinar is, there's a poster coming up on the screen here, is going to talk about technology, strategy, and adoption. Part of our practitioner series that we've been doing on our webinars. And the speaker is Rachel Radford. So I think you'll find that very, very interesting. And by the way, today, if we're going to send you out an email and ask you to fill in the feedback form. So please fill it in because it helps us to plan for future webinars. I do want to tell you that our upcoming November 9th and 10th would have been, November 9th would have been our annual transport workshop, annual general meeting, reception and dinner in Ottawa. That's always been well attended. Unfortunately, this year, of course, with COVID, we're going to have to do this in a virtual fashion. So we're going to do a two-day webinar. Actually, webinars on the 9th and 10th, they will be from 11 a.m. to about 1:15 p.m. And so stay tuned. We have some excellent lineup of speakers. So I hope you would mark those dates down. We will be sending out everybody an email with the final agenda as we get it. Also, if you're not a member of CILTNA, I would encourage you to join. We have a very tremendous membership in North America. We're growing very rapidly in the United States under the direction of Andrew Young in Dallas, Texas. So membership is easy. You go into our website, you can see, you can download the under membership, see how you could join, and we have a committee that looks at your qualifications to see what whether you would be a member or a chartered member designation. So I would sincerely encourage all of you for doing that. And I have just one other chat that just came. I'll just read it here. Anyone has an interest in discussing new shipping services between the Great Lakes, Ireland, and Europe, they can get in touch with me, Jerry Hollisey, Head of Business Development for Shannon Foynes Port in Ireland. That's nice that Jerry's joined us from Ireland today. And Jerry, I'm going to be in touch with you, by the way, because we're always looking for new topics, because we have here in Ontario, we have a great interest in shipping into our Great Lakes system, our St. Lawrence Seaway Great Lakes system, and especially with Ireland, Europe, and the rest. We're trying to increase that business, so thank you. So again, I'm about to close off the webinar, and again, thank you, Ann. Boy, you did a tremendous job, and I know how many hours you put into this, so we really appreciate that. And for everybody on here today, on behalf of the Board of Directors of the Institute, thank you very, very much, and please stay safe.
Thank you. Stay safe.